The Grandview Hotel stood like a broken promise against the storm-lashed coastline of Maine, its boarded windows staring blindly at the Atlantic. Sarah Martinez clutched the rusted keys, rain soaking through her thrift store coat as her 4 children huddled behind her. The lawyer had called it worthless property, just another burden from the father who'd abandoned her before birth. But Sarah didn't know her father had been one of the world's most successful art forgers, and the hotel wasn't just a building. Hidden behind false walls and beneath rotting floorboards lay stolen masterpieces, bearer bonds, and Swiss bank account numbers totaling over $200 million. The same criminal network that had hunted her father for 20 years was already closing in, watching, waiting. As Sarah pushed open the lobby door, ancient hinges screaming in protest, she had no idea that stepping inside would transform her family from poverty-stricken survivors into the most wanted targets on the East Coast. What happens when a single mother discovers her inheritance isn't just a hotel, but a treasure vault that could either save her family or destroy them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the howling wind. 8-year-old Miguel immediately wrinkled his nose. "Mom, it smells like dead fish and sadness." Sarah almost smiled despite everything. Miguel had always been her little philosopher, finding poetry in their worst moments. "It's just been closed up for a long time, baby." Emma, her 15-year-old, pulled out her phone's flashlight. No signal. Perfect. Now we're officially stranded in a horror movie. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a lobby frozen in time, moth-eaten velvet chairs, a reception desk thick with dust, and yellowed photographs hanging askew on water-stained walls. "Can we go home?" whispered Sophia, her 6-year-old daughter, tugging at Sarah's soaked jeans. "This place is scary." Sarah's chest tightened. They'd lost their apartment 3 months ago when the factory closed. Since then, home had been Emma's beat-up Honda, sleeping in Walmart parking lots and eating dollar-menu dinners. This crumbling hotel was their last option. Literally. "This is home now," she said, forcing conviction into her voice. "We're going to make it work." 12-year-old Carlos was already exploring, his footsteps echoing across warped hardwood floors. "Mom, there's like 100 rooms up there. We could each have our own wing." Sarah found the main electrical panel behind the reception desk. She held her breath and flipped the master switch. Miraculously, lights flickered to life throughout the lobby, though several bulbs immediately popped and died. At least the electricity worked. "Okay, everyone stay together. Let's find somewhere dry to sleep tonight." They climbed the grand staircase, Sarah running her hand along the once elegant banister. Whatever the Grandview had been in its heyday, someone had loved this place. Someone had invested time, money, and dreams into every carved detail. Someone named Vincent Martinez, her father. The lawyer's words echoed in her memory. He specifically requested that if anything happened to him, the property should go to Sarah Martinez of Phoenix, Arizona, his daughter. 34 years of wandering, and that's all she'd learned. His name and the fact that he'd remembered her existence. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors bearing tarnished brass numbers. Sarah chose room 201 at random, inserting the master key. The lock turned smoothly, surprisingly well-maintained for such an old building. The room was spacious but sparse, a double bed with a bare mattress, a writing desk beneath tall windows, and a bathroom that smelled of rust and neglect. It would do for now. "Emma and Sophia take the bed. Carlos and Miguel will drag some blankets from other rooms and make pallets on the floor." As her children settled in, arguing over who got which pillow, Sarah stood at the window, staring out at the churning ocean. The storm was getting worse, rain lashing against the glass in sheets. But for the first time in months, they were warm and dry. She opened the desk drawer, looking for anything that might tell her about the man who'd left her this place. Inside lay a single item, a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. She opened it carefully. The first entry was dated 23 years ago, written in careful cursive. "The Grandview will be Sarah's legacy. She must never know the truth about what I've done, but if something happens to me, the clues are here. She's smart, smarter than her old man ever was. She'll figure it out when she needs to. Sarah's hands trembled. Her father had planned this. Somehow he'd known she would end up here, desperate and searching for answers. Outside, hidden among the trees lining the property, a figure in a black coat lowered his binoculars. After 20 years of watching and waiting, Vincent Martinez's daughter had finally come home. The hunt was about to begin. The hotel's lobby felt like a mausoleum, dust motes dancing in shafts of pale morning light that struggled through grimy windows. Sarah stood in the center of the vast space, her footsteps echoing off cracked marble floors as she tried to process what she'd inherited. The Grandview Hotel had clearly seen better days, probably decades ago. She pulled out the keys the lawyer had given her, a heavy brass ring containing more than 20 different keys of varying sizes and ages. Some looked original to the building, others appeared newer, and a few seemed oddly shaped for typical locks. Her father, Thomas Brennan, had apparently been quite the collector of keys, though for what purposes remained unclear. The front desk stretched along one wall, its mahogany surface scarred but still elegant beneath years of neglect. Behind it, pigeonhole slots for room keys created a geometric pattern that reminded Sarah of a crossword puzzle. She ran her fingers along the dusty wood, wondering what kind of man her father had been. Her mother had never spoken of him, taking that secret to her grave 3 years ago. A sudden creak from somewhere above made her freeze. The building settled around her with the groans and whispers of old wood and shifting foundations. She told herself it was normal for a structure this age, but something about the sound seemed deliberate, as if someone was moving carefully through the floors above. Sarah climbed the grand staircase, its brass banister cold under her palm. The second floor stretched in both directions, a long hallway lined with identical doors. Room numbers were painted in fading gold, 201, 202, 203. She tried her father's keyring on the first door, cycling through several keys before finding one that turned the lock with a satisfying click. The room was surprisingly clean compared to the lobby. A bed with a simple white coverlet, a small desk by the window, and a wardrobe that looked like it belonged in a period film. But what caught her attention was the precision with which everything was arranged. The desk chair was positioned at an exact angle. The lamp sat precisely centered on the bedside table. Even the curtains were drawn to identical widths on either side of the window. She moved to the desk and opened its single drawer. Inside lay a manila folder containing what appeared to be registration records from the 1980s and 90s. Names, dates, room numbers, all meticulously recorded in the same careful handwriting. But as she flipped through the pages, certain names appeared multiple times with unusual frequency. Always in different rooms, always paying in cash, and always staying for exactly 3 days. The phone rang. Sarah jumped, her heart hammering as the shrill sound echoed through the empty room. She hadn't even realized the hotel still had working phone service. The antique rotary phone on the desk continued its insistent ringing. After 6 rings, she lifted the heavy receiver. Hello? Silence, then a man's voice, gravelly and cautious. Who is this? This is Sarah Chen. I own this hotel now. A long pause. Thomas's daughter. It wasn't a question. Sarah gripped the phone tighter. You knew my father? Where did you find it? The urgency in his voice made her skin prickle. Find what? I don't understand. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the receiver before slowly replacing it in its cradle. Her hands were shaking. She looked around the room with new eyes, searching for whatever it might be. The furniture, the walls, the floorboards, everything seemed suddenly suspect. She returned to the registration records, examining them more carefully. One name kept appearing, Marcus Delacroix, always in room 412, always for 3 days, always once per month for nearly a decade. She flipped to the back of the folder and found a small envelope taped to the inside cover. Inside the envelope was a photograph. black and white, slightly faded, showing 3 men in suits standing in front of the hotel's entrance. The hotel looked pristine, clearly from its heyday. She recognized one face immediately. It was her father, younger but unmistakably the same man from the single photograph her mother had kept. The other 2 men were strangers, but something about their posture and the way they looked directly at the camera suggested they were important, powerful. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in pencil, "The Trinity, 1987, before everything changed." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hotel's drafty rooms. She gathered the folder and photograph, then made her way back downstairs. The lobby felt different now, charged with possibility and menace. Every shadow could be hiding something, every creak could signal danger. As she reached the front desk, she noticed something she'd missed before. One of the pigeonhole slots behind the desk, the one marked 412, contained a small folded piece of paper. She retrieved it with trembling fingers and unfolded it carefully. In the same handwriting as the registration records, 5 words that changed everything, Sarah. Trust no one else. Run. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the Pacific Grand looking even more forlorn against the grey sky. Sarah stood in the lobby, coffee growing cold in her hands, studying the faded grandeur around her with new eyes. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets now, every creak of the old building a whispered confession. She'd barely slept after finding the hidden compartment. The photograph of her father and the mysterious woman haunted her thoughts, along with the weight of knowing someone had been watching her. The business card from Marcus Holloway sat on the reception desk like a loaded gun, his offer to buy the hotel suddenly taking on sinister undertones. Sarah pulled out her phone and searched for Holloway Development. The company's sleek website showcased luxury resorts across the Pacific coast, each one a monument to wealth and exclusivity. Marcus Holloway's biography painted him as a visionary developer, but something about his polished smile and the corporate photos made her skin crawl. A knock at the front door interrupted her research. Through the grimy glass, she could see a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Unlike yesterday's mysterious visitor, this woman waited patiently, her posture suggesting someone accustomed to hard work rather than boardrooms. Sarah opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "You must be Richard's daughter." The woman's voice carried a slight accent, possibly Eastern European. "I am Elena Vasquez. I worked here for your father many years. I heard you had come." Something in the woman's weathered face inspired trust. Sarah stepped aside, allowing Elena to enter. The older woman moved through the lobby with familiar ease, her fingers trailing along surfaces as if greeting old friends. "You knew my father well?" Sarah asked. Elena's smile was sad but warm. "Mr. Richard, he was good man, troubled but good. He spoke of you often, wondered if you were safe, if you were happy." She paused by the grand staircase, her hand resting on the carved banister. "He wanted to contact you, but he said it was too dangerous, that his past would bring harm to you." "What past? What was he involved in?" Before Elena could answer, both women heard the sound of car doors slamming outside. Sarah peered through the window to see 3 black SUVs parked in the circular drive. Men in expensive suits were climbing out, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Elena grabbed Sarah's arm with surprising strength. "They have come sooner than I expected. We must go. Now." "Who are they?" "People who want what your father hid. People who killed him for it." The word "killed" hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Killed?" But the lawyer said it was a heart attack. "Your father's heart was strong as ox. Come, I show you the way he showed me." Elena pulled Sarah toward the back of the lobby, past the old registration desk. "He said if dangerous men ever came, I should use the old service passages." The front door rattled as someone tested the handle. Elena pressed against a section of wood paneling that looked identical to the rest, and it swung inward silently, revealing a narrow passage. "During Prohibition, hotel had many secrets," Elena whispered as they slipped inside. "Your father, he learned them all." The passage was dark and musty, clearly built for staff to move unseen through the hotel. Elena led the way with practiced confidence, her small flashlight cutting through the shadows. Behind them, Sarah could hear voices in the lobby, professional and cold. "Search every room. She has to be here somewhere." They climbed a hidden staircase that paralleled the main stairs, the old wood creaking softly under their feet. Elena stopped at what appeared to be a dead end, but her fingers found hidden latches, and another panel swung open into a small room Sarah hadn't seen during her exploration. The space was clearly her father's private study. Unlike the rest of the hotel, this room was well maintained, filled with filing cabinets, maps, and photographs. One entire wall was covered with what looked like a timeline, strings connecting various newspaper clippings and documents. "Your father spent years trying to understand what he had stumbled into," Elena said, closing the panel behind them. "He was accountant, before he bought hotel. Very good with numbers, very good at finding patterns." Sarah approached the wall display, her eyes widening as she read the headlines. Financial scandals, political corruption, mysterious deaths of whistleblowers. At the center of it all was a photograph of a younger Marcus Holloway shaking hands with a man whose face had been circled in red ink. "What is all this?" "Evidence," Elena said simply. "Your father discovered that certain very powerful people were using legitimate businesses to hide stolen money, billions of dollars taken from governments, from aid programs, from people who could not fight back." Through the hidden room's small window, Sarah could see more vehicles arriving. The parking area now looked like a federal raid, except these men didn't move like law enforcement. Elena handed her a leather portfolio from the desk. "Your father prepared this for you. Everything you need to understand is inside, but we cannot stay here. They will find this room eventually." Sarah clutched the portfolio, her father's legacy heavy in her hands. Outside, she could hear the systematic search of the hotel beginning, voices coordinating through rooms she'd wandered innocently just hours before. The game had begun, and she was already several moves behind. The stairs groaned under Sarah's weight as she made her way to the third floor, Marcus following close behind. The key she'd found felt warm in her palm, as if it held more than just the power to open a door. It held answers. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should call the police first." Sarah paused at the landing, considering. The rational part of her mind agreed with Marcus, but something deeper urged her forward. Her father had hidden this key for a reason, and if there really were dangerous people involving the authorities might only make things worse. "Just a quick look," she said, though they both knew she was lying. The third floor was darker than the others, with most of the light fixtures missing their bulbs. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows. Sarah counted the doors until she reached 312, her heart hammering against her ribs. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, as if it had been recently maintained despite the decay surrounding it. The door opened to reveal a room that made her breath catch in her throat. Unlike the deteriorating condition of the rest of the hotel, room 312 was pristine. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, each drawer meticulously labeled with dates spanning 3 decades. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with photographs, documents, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. But it was the far wall that made Sarah's knees weak. Dozens of photographs were pinned to a cork board, faces she didn't recognize connected by red string in an intricate web. At the center of it all was a photograph of a younger version of herself, taken from what must have been a considerable distance. She was leaving her apartment in Chicago, completely unaware she was being watched. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed behind her. "Sarah, how long has he been watching you?" She moved closer to the wall, her hands trembling as she examined the photos. There she was at 25, graduating from law school, at 28, walking into her first job at the firm. Last year, having coffee with her ex-boyfriend David. The surveillance was comprehensive, spanning nearly a decade of her life. "He knew everything about me," she whispered, touching the edge of one photograph. But why didn't he ever contact me? Marcus was examining the desk, careful not to disturb anything. Maybe he was protecting you from something. Look at this. He pointed to a thick folder labeled Blackwater Development, Confidential. Inside were documents that made Sarah's blood run cold. Bank statements showing millions of dollars in suspicious transfers. Photographs of men in expensive suits shaking hands with known criminals. And at the bottom, a letter addressed to her in her father's handwriting. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the envelope. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the worst has happened. I know you must hate me for abandoning you, but everything I did was to keep you safe. The Grandview Hotel was never just a business. It was a front for something much larger. For 30 years, I've been documenting the activities of a criminal organization that uses legitimate businesses to launder money. They trusted me because I helped them, but I was really gathering evidence that could destroy them all. Sarah had to sit down. The chair creaked under her weight as she continued reading. The $200 million hidden in this hotel isn't money. It's worth far more than that. It's information, financial records, photographs, recordings, names, dates, everything needed to bring down a network that reaches into the highest levels of government and business. But they're getting suspicious. I think they know what I've been doing. If something happens to me, you're the only person I trust to finish what I started. The letter went on to detail a safety deposit box in town, more hidden compartments throughout the hotel, and a warning that made Sarah's blood freeze. They'll come for you once they realize you have access to everything. Trust no one except the man I've hired to protect you. His name is Marcus Chen, and he's been watching over you for years without your knowledge. He's the only reason you've stayed safe this long. Sarah's head snapped up to look at Marcus, who had gone very still by the desk. Marcus. He turned slowly, his expression guilty but determined. I was going to tell you. You've been watching me. For years. She felt like the room was spinning. Who are you, really? Former FBI. Your father hired me after I left the bureau. Sarah, everything in that letter is true. The organization your father was investigating. They're called the Consortium. They've killed to protect their secrets before, and they'll kill again. Outside, the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the empty hotel. Marcus moved to the window and cursed softly. We need to go. Now. The leather-bound journal cracked as Sarah opened it, releasing the scent of old paper and her father's cologne, a smell she'd never known but somehow recognized. The pages were filled with his careful handwriting, dates spanning the last 15 years of his life, but as she read, her confusion deepened. March 15th. The roses in room 237 need pruning. Mrs. Henderson's cat has been wandering the 3rd floor again. April 2nd. Fixed the loose floorboard in the lobby. The grandfather clock chimes 13 times at midnight now. June 8th. Found another letter slipped under the front door. They're getting impatient. Sarah frowned. These weren't typical hotel management notes. The Windsor had been closed for over a decade, so why was he writing about maintenance and guests? She flipped through more pages, finding similar entries mixed with cryptic observations about visitors who never checked in and payments made to room numbers that don't exist. A photograph slipped from between the pages, a picture of her father standing in the hotel lobby, but not the decrepit version she'd seen. This lobby was pristine, elegant, with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers blazing with light. A woman stood beside him, her face scratched out with black ink, but Sarah could see enough to notice the expensive jewelry and tailored clothing. What were you really doing here, Dad? She whispered to the empty room. Thunder crashed outside, and the lights flickered. Sarah looked up from the journal just as a beam of headlights swept across the hotel's front windows. A black sedan was pulling into the circular driveway, moving slowly through the rain. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't called anyone, and Hartley had said the hotel was completely isolated. Sarah quickly closed the journal and stuffed it into her jacket, then moved to the window and peered around the dusty curtain. 2 figures emerged from the car, a tall man in a dark coat and a woman with silver hair pulled back severely. They moved with purpose, not the hesitant steps of lost travelers. The woman pointed toward different sections of the building while the man spoke into a phone. Sarah's mouth went dry. These people weren't here by accident. She backed away from the window and grabbed her keys, heart hammering. The main entrance was visible from where the strangers stood, but she remembered seeing a service door near the kitchen during her earlier exploration. Moving as quietly as possible, she made her way through the lobby, past the reception desk, and into the hotel's back corridors. The kitchen was a cavern of stainless steel and shadows. Sarah felt along the walls until she found the service door, but when she tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. The lock was old and stubborn, requiring her to throw her shoulder against the frame while turning the key. Behind her, she heard the distinct sound of the front door opening. "Hasn't been here long," a man's voice echoed through the lobby. "Tire tracks are fresh. Search every room," came a woman's reply, crisp and commanding. If she found anything. Sarah didn't wait to hear the rest. She gave the service door one final desperate shove, and it opened with a protesting shriek that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet hotel. She slipped outside into the storm, rain immediately soaking through her clothes. Her rental car was parked by the main entrance, completely exposed. But as she crept around the building's perimeter, staying close to the walls, she realized the stranger's sedan was blocking her exit anyway. She was trapped. Lightning illuminated the hotel's grounds, revealing a series of outbuildings she hadn't noticed before. A maintenance shed, what looked like old servant quarters, and something larger that might have been a carriage house. Sarah sprinted toward the nearest structure, her feet splashing through puddles as voices carried from inside the hotel. The maintenance shed was unlocked. Inside, she found herself among rusted tools and paint cans, but also something unexpected, a newer-looking filing cabinet, completely out of place among the decay. She tried the drawers and found the top one unlocked. Inside were blueprints of the hotel, but not the standard architectural kind. These showed hidden passages, secret rooms, and a complex network of spaces that didn't appear on any normal building plans. Notes were scrawled in her father's handwriting: primary vault, sub-basement level, access point behind library panel, emergency exit through wine cellar. Sarah's hands shook as she studied the drawings. The Windsor wasn't just a hotel, it was a maze of hidden compartments and secret spaces, and somewhere in that maze was something worth $200 million. A flashlight beam swept past the shed's dirty window. "Check the outbuildings!" the woman's voice called through the rain. Sarah grabbed the blueprints and looked around desperately. According to the drawings, there was a tunnel connecting the maintenance shed to the hotel's basement, accessed through what appeared to be a floor panel. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached her hiding place. Time to find out just how deep her father's secrets really went. The basement felt different in the pale morning light filtering through the grimy windows. Sarah descended the creaking stairs with her laptop bag and the journal, Detective Morrison's warning about the break still echoing in her mind. She'd barely slept, her thoughts consumed by the photograph and the mysterious initials scattered throughout her father's writings. She set up her makeshift workspace near the boiler room where she'd found the hidden compartment. The journal lay open beside her laptop, its pages yellowed and brittle. Each entry seemed to be written in a code that danced just beyond her comprehension, references to the foundation and deposits that clearly weren't about banking, mentions of names she didn't recognize, and dates that formed no obvious pattern. The photograph of her father with the 3 other men taunted her from where she'd propped it against a water pipe. One of the men looked familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him. His sharp features and calculating eyes seemed to follow her as she worked. Sarah pulled up a search engine and began typing combinations of the initials from the journal. RCMVDT. She tried pairing them with the hotel's name, the city, anything that might yield results. After an hour of dead ends, she switched tactics and searched for information about the hotel's history. The results were sparse. The Grandview Hotel had been built in 1952 by a consortium of local businessmen. It had thrived through the 60s and 70s before beginning its slow decline. What struck her as odd was how little information existed about the ownership changes over the years. For a building that size in the city centre, the paper trail seemed deliberately obscure. A sudden noise from upstairs made her freeze, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the lobby floor above. Sarah held her breath, listening. The police had finished their investigation yesterday, and she hadn't given anyone else access to the building. She quietly closed her laptop and slipped the journal into her bag. The footsteps continued, seeming to pause at different locations throughout the ground floor. Someone was searching for something. Moving carefully to avoid the creaking floorboards, Sarah made her way to the far end of the basement, where a service staircase led to the hotel's rear exit. But as she reached for the door handle, she heard voices. "Check the basement again. She was here yesterday, and Morrison said she's been staying in the building. The whole place is a maze. Could take hours to search properly." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. These weren't police officers or city inspectors. She recognized the tone, predatory, urgent. These were the people Morrison had warned her about. She retreated deeper into the basement's shadows, clutching her bag. The service corridor stretched ahead of her, lined with storage rooms and mechanical equipment. Her father's journal pressed against her side, and suddenly she wondered if he'd faced similar moments, hiding in these same shadows while dangerous people searched for him. The basement door opened with a groan, and footsteps began descending. Sarah slipped into a storage room filled with old furniture and cleaning supplies, pulling the door almost closed, but leaving it cracked so she could see into the corridor. Two men emerged from the stairwell. The larger one wore an expensive suit that looked out of place in the dingy basement. The other was younger, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence. They both carried flashlights despite the dim lighting. "Split up," the suited man said. "She might have found something by now. Check every room, every hiding spot, and remember, we need her alive until we know what she knows." They separated, each taking a different section of the basement. Sarah pressed herself further back into the storage room, her mind racing. They weren't just looking for her, they were looking for whatever her father had hidden, which meant the journal and photograph weren't the only secrets the Grandview held. The younger man's footsteps grew closer. Sarah could see his shadow moving past the crack in the door. She held perfectly still, not even daring to breathe, as he paused directly outside her hiding spot. The door handle began to turn. But then the suited man called out from across the basement, "Found something! Fresh coffee cup, still warm. She was here recently." The handle stopped moving, and the footsteps moved away. Sarah waited until she heard both men converging on the other side of the basement before she carefully pushed the door open. The corridor was empty. She had to get out, but more importantly, she needed to understand what she'd stumbled into. Her father's journal mentioned safe deposit boxes, backup locations, insurance policies. If these men were willing to break into the hotel and hunt her down, whatever her father had hidden was worth far more than she'd imagined. Sarah slipped toward the rear staircase, her father's secrets weighing heavy in her bag. Outside, she could disappear into the city and figure out her next move. But as she reached for the exit door, she realized something that made her blood run cold. The men had mentioned that Detective Morrison told them she'd been staying in the building. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the decoded message glowing on Marcus's laptop screen. The numbers and coordinates seemed to pulse with malevolent energy in the dim light of room 237. Behind them, the hidden wall panel gaped open like a mouth revealing secrets it had kept buried for decades. "We need to get out of here," Marcus whispered, his eyes darting toward the window where shadows moved between the pine trees. "Those weren't random hikers I saw earlier. Someone's watching the hotel." But Sarah couldn't tear her gaze away from the screen. The coordinates pointed to a location in the Swiss Alps, while the numbers appeared to be account information for banks she'd never heard of. Her father's final message was becoming clearer. He hadn't just hidden money, he'd hidden evidence of something much larger. A soft creak echoed from somewhere in the hotel's depths. Both Sarah and Marcus froze, listening. The sound came again, deliberate and measured. Footsteps. The service elevator, Sarah breathed. She'd heard that particular mechanical wheeze earlier when exploring the hotel's lower levels. Someone was coming up from the basement. Marcus was already closing the laptop and shoving it into his backpack. Is there another way out? Sarah's mind raced through the hotel's layout. Room 237 sat at the end of a long corridor with only one exit, but she remembered something from her childhood exploration fantasies while reading hotel brochures. The dumbwaiter. It connects to the kitchen. They could hear voices now, low and urgent, speaking in what sounded like Russian. At least 2 men, maybe 3. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air seeping through the old windows. The dumbwaiter shaft was narrow and cobwebbed, designed decades ago to transport meals between floors. Sarah squeezed through first, her heart hammering against her ribs as she lowered herself into the darkness. The ancient rope and pulley system groaned under their weight, and she prayed it wouldn't snap. Marcus followed, pulling the panel closed just as they heard the corridor door splinter. Heavy boots thundered across the floor above them as they descended through the bowels of the hotel, past forgotten storage rooms and maintenance spaces that reeked of mildew and decay. They emerged in the industrial kitchen, gasping and covered in dust. Through the grimy windows, Sarah could see more figures moving around the hotel's perimeter, professional, coordinated. These weren't opportunistic thieves, they were a team. "How did they find us so fast?" Sarah whispered, but even as she asked, she knew the answer. Someone had been monitoring communications, waiting for any sign that the hotel's secrets were being uncovered. Her father's paranoid security measures suddenly made perfect sense. Marcus grabbed her arm. "The tunnel. You said your father mentioned maintenance tunnels in his notes." Sarah nodded, remembering the hand-drawn map she'd found in the safe. The hotel sat on the site of an old mining operation, and her father had apparently maintained some of the original underground passages. The entrance was behind the main furnace, concealed by a false wall that required the same numerical sequence they'd used upstairs. As they made their way through the basement, Sarah could hear the systematic destruction happening above them. Whoever these people were, they were tearing the hotel apart room by room. She thought of all her father's carefully hidden clues being discovered and destroyed, and felt a surge of desperate determination. The tunnel entrance opened with a grinding of stone and metal. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and old timber. Marcus clicked on a small flashlight, revealing a rough-hewn passage that stretched into darkness. "Where does it lead?" he asked. Sarah consulted her father's map by the thin light. "About half a mile through the mountain to an old mining shack. From there we can reach the main road." They had barely entered the tunnel when an explosion shook the hotel above them. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Sarah heard the distant sound of structural collapse. Someone was making sure that any remaining secrets stayed buried. As they stumbled through the narrow passage, Sarah's mind churned over everything they'd learned. The Swiss coordinates, the bank accounts, the obvious international nature of whoever was hunting them. Her father hadn't just been a hotel owner, he'd been involved in something that spanned continents and decades. The tunnel seemed endless, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. Behind them, she could hear new sounds, voices and movement. Their pursuers had found the tunnel entrance. "They're following us," Marcus panted, picking up the pace. Sarah clutched the laptop bag tighter, knowing it contained the only copies of her father's decoded messages. Whatever those Swiss coordinates led to, people were willing to kill for it, and now she was the only person standing between them and a $200 million secret that her father had died to protect. The tunnel stretched ahead into blackness, and behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer with each passing moment. The hidden room behind the painting felt like stepping into a time capsule. Sarah's flashlight beam swept across walls lined with filing cabinets, their metal surfaces dulled by decades of neglect. The air was thick and stale, carrying the musty scent of old paper and forgotten secrets. Marcus squeezed through the narrow opening behind her, his breathing sharp in the confined space. "Jesus, Sarah, how long do you think this has been here?" Judging by the dust, probably since the hotel was built. She approached the nearest filing cabinet, her fingers trembling as she pulled on the top drawer. It slid open with a rusty groan, revealing rows of manila folders arranged in meticulous order. The first folder she grabbed contained photographs, black and white images of men in expensive suits shaking hands outside what looked like government buildings. She recognized some faces from old newspaper clippings she'd seen in history classes. Politicians, businessmen, faces that belonged to a world of power she'd never imagined her father could touch. "Look at this," Marcus whispered, holding up a thick folder from another cabinet. "Bank statements, Swiss accounts. Jesus, Sarah, these numbers." She moved closer, scanning the documents over his shoulder. Account balances that made her father's $200 million figure suddenly seem conservative. Transactions spanning decades, money flowing between shell companies with names that sounded like law firms but were registered in countries she'd never heard of. A manila envelope tucked behind the other folders caught her attention. Her name was written across it in her father's careful handwriting. Inside, she found a letter dated just 3 months before his death. "Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've begun to understand what I've spent my life protecting. The hotel was never about hospitality, it was about preservation. Every document in this room represents a choice between justice and survival, between truth and the safety of everyone I've ever cared about." Her hands shook as she continued reading. "The consortium believes they own the truth, that money can bury any secret deep enough that it never sees daylight. They're wrong. I've spent 30 years collecting evidence of their crimes, insider trading that crashed entire economies, political assassinations disguised as accidents, environmental disasters they covered up while people died." Marcus had stopped reading his own documents and was watching her face. What does it say? He was building a case against something called the consortium. She looked up at the rows of cabinets surrounding them. "All of this, it's evidence." The letter continued. "I know you never wanted this responsibility, and I'm sorry for leaving it to you. But they killed your mother, Sarah. The car accident when you were 5 wasn't random. Helen had discovered what I was doing, threatened to expose everything if I didn't stop. They made it look like she fell asleep at the wheel." The words hit her like a physical blow. She sank against the wall, the letter falling from her numb fingers. All these years, she'd carried the weight of losing her mother to a senseless accident. To learn it was murder, that her father had known and said nothing. "Sarah?" Marcus moved toward her, concern etched across his face. "They killed my mother." The words came out flat, emotionless. "He knew, and he never told me." Marcus picked up the letter, scanning the remaining paragraphs. "He says here that he was protecting you. If you'd known the truth, they would have come for you too." She forced herself to stand, to focus on the practical reality of their situation. Grief and anger were luxuries she couldn't afford, not when those same people were probably searching for her right now. What else does it say? "There's a key hidden in the hotel's foundation, behind the boiler in the basement. It opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. The box contains copies of everything here, plus something he calls the master file." The sound of footsteps in the hallway above made them both freeze. Heavy boots, moving with military precision across the old wooden floors. Sarah switched off her flashlight, plunging them into complete darkness. "How many ways out of here?" Marcus whispered. She tried to remember the building's layout, but the hidden room wasn't on any blueprint she'd seen. "I don't know. This passage might connect to others, but..." The footsteps stopped directly above them. Through the thin ceiling, they could hear muffled voices, professional and clipped. Someone was giving orders. Sarah stuffed her father's letter into her jacket pocket and grabbed 2 more folders at random. Whatever evidence they couldn't take now might be destroyed if these people found the room. Marcus was doing the same, cramming documents into his backpack. A new sound reached them. Metal on metal, like someone prying at the painting that concealed their entrance. They'd found the hidden door. There. Marcus pointed his small penlight toward the back corner of the room, where she could just make out another narrow opening between two filing cabinets. We need to move. Now. The sound of splintering wood echoed above them as they squeezed through the gap deeper into the hotel's hidden arteries, carrying fragments of her father's terrible legacy into the darkness. The hotel's basement stretched deeper than Sarah had imagined, a labyrinth of forgotten storage rooms and utility corridors that seemed to burrow into the very bones of the building. Her flashlight beam cut through the musty darkness as she followed Marcus down a narrow hallway lined with rusted pipes and crumbling brick walls. "Your father was paranoid about security," Marcus whispered, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "He designed this place with more hidden passages than a medieval castle. Most of the construction workers never saw the complete blueprints." Sarah's pulse quickened as they approached a heavy wooden door marked Boiler Room, authorized personnel only. The brass nameplate was tarnished with age, but when Marcus pressed his thumb against a seemingly innocent screw head, she heard the soft click of electronic locks disengaging. "Biometrics scanner," he explained, noting her surprised expression. "Your father installed it 15 years ago, had mine programmed as backup." He pushed the door open, revealing not a boiler room, but a sophisticated control center that looked like it belonged in a high-tech security firm rather than a crumbling hotel. Banks of monitors lined the walls, most dark now, but several still glowed with feeds from cameras Sarah hadn't even known existed. She could see the hotel lobby, the hallways, even her own room from multiple angles. But it was the large map dominating the far wall that made her breath catch. The map showed the entire city, but it wasn't the streets or buildings that drew her attention. Red pins marked specific locations, connected by colored threads that formed an intricate web across the urban landscape. Names were written in her father's careful handwriting beside each pin, some she recognized from newspaper headlines, others completely foreign. "Political figures, judges, business leaders," Marcus said, following her gaze. "Your father spent decades documenting their connections, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. That's what made him so valuable to certain organizations, and so dangerous when he decided to get out." Sarah moved closer to examine the map. One cluster of pins surrounded the financial district, another centered on City Hall, but it was the photographs tucked beneath several pins that made her stomach turn. Images of men in expensive suits shaking hands, passing briefcases, meeting in shadowed parking garages. He was building evidence, she realized. More than that. He was building insurance. Every corrupt deal, every dirty transaction, every skeleton in every closet, it's all documented here. Marcus pulled out a chair from the central desk. "The people who want you gone, they're all on this map. And they know that if this information ever goes public..." A soft chime interrupted him. One of the monitors flickered to life, showing the hotel's rear entrance. Sarah watched in horror as 3 figures in dark clothing slipped through the service door she was certain had been locked. "They found us," Marcus said grimly, his fingers flying over a keyboard. Additional monitors activated, tracking the intruders as they moved through the hotel with military precision. "They're heading for the upper floors first. Probably think we're still in your room." Sarah studied the map again, her mind racing. "The safety deposit box key. It's not just for one location, is it? This whole network, all these documented secrets, they're stored in multiple places." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Your father was brilliant. The information is distributed across a dozen different banks and private storage facilities. The key you found opens the master catalog that tells you where to find each piece of evidence." On the monitor, the intruders had reached the 2nd floor. Sarah recognized the lead figure's purposeful stride, the same man who had been asking questions about her at the front desk. His face was clearly visible now in the hallway's overhead lights, sharp features, cold eyes, and a scar running from his left ear to his jawline. "Victor Kozlov," Marcus identified him, Former military, now works for people who prefer to remain unnamed. If he's here personally, this situation is more serious than I thought." Sarah felt the weight of the key in her pocket, suddenly understanding why her father had hidden it so carefully. It wasn't just a key to money, it was a key to justice, to exposing a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of power. "We need to get to the bank," she said, "tonight. Too dangerous. Kozlov's team will have the building surrounded. Then we use one of my father's escape routes." Sarah pointed to the map, where several tunnel symbols were marked beneath the hotel. "He didn't design this place with just one way out." Marcus hesitated, then moved to a metal cabinet and withdrew 2 handguns. He offered one to Sarah, who stared at it for a long moment before taking it. The weight felt foreign and terrifying in her hands. "Your father would be proud," Marcus said softly. "He always hoped you'd inherited his survival instincts." Above them, the sound of footsteps echoed through the ceiling. Kozlov's team was methodically searching each room, and it wouldn't be long before they discovered the basement entrance. Sarah tucked the gun into her jacket and followed Marcus toward a section of wall that looked identical to every other section, until he pressed another hidden switch, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the leather-bound journal beneath the flickering light of her phone's flashlight. The hidden room felt smaller now, pressing in around her with the weight of decades-old secrets. Each page she turned revealed more of her father's meticulous documentation: names, dates, locations, and most importantly, bank account numbers scattered across 3 different countries. Marcus Kane. The name appeared repeatedly throughout the entries, always accompanied by dollar amounts that made Sarah's head spin. Her father hadn't just been documenting transactions, he'd been building a case. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every suspicious transfer had been catalogued with the precision of someone who knew his life depended on getting every detail right. A sound from somewhere above made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving through the hotel's main floor. Sarah clicked off her phone and plunged the room into absolute darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd locked the front entrance when she arrived, hadn't she? The memory felt fuzzy now, obscured by her excitement at finally accessing the hidden chamber. The footsteps paused directly overhead. Sarah counted her breaths, trying to calm the panic rising in her throat. Maybe it was just the old building settling. Maybe... "Sarah?" The voice drifted down through the floorboards, barely audible but unmistakably human. Male, unfamiliar. "I know you're in there." She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, clutching the journal to her chest. The hidden entrance was concealed behind a bookshelf that had swung inward on nearly silent hinges. If she stayed quiet, if she didn't move, maybe whoever was up there would assume she'd left. "Your father was a smart man," the voice continued, closer now. "But not smart enough to cover all his tracks. He left breadcrumbs, and eventually we followed them right back to you." Sarah's blood turned to ice. They knew about the journal, about what her father had hidden. The footsteps resumed, methodical now, as if whoever was up there was conducting a systematic search. She heard furniture being moved, drawers sliding open, the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. Her phone buzzed against her palm, a text message. The notification light seemed blindingly bright in the darkness. With shaking fingers, she tilted the screen away from the ceiling and checked the display. Unknown number, the basement. Now, come alone, or she dies. Attached was a photo that made Sarah's stomach lurch. Detective Rivera, bound to a chair in what looked like an old warehouse, blood trickling from a cut above her left eye. The detective's service weapon was nowhere to be seen, and her usual confident expression had been replaced by something Sarah had never seen there before: fear. The footsteps overhead had stopped. Sarah realized with growing horror that her phone's buzz had been loud enough to hear. In the suffocating silence that followed, she could practically feel someone listening, waiting. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they found the hidden room. Moving as quietly as possible, Sarah tucked the journal inside her jacket and felt along the wall for the secondary exit her father's notes had mentioned. Her fingers found the outline of another concealed panel, this one smaller, clearly designed as an emergency escape route. The mechanism was stiff with age, but after precious seconds of fumbling, it gave way. The passage beyond was barely wide enough for her shoulders, a tunnel that seemed to slope downward into the hotel's foundations. Sarah squeezed through just as she heard the bookshelf above grinding open. Light flooded the hidden room behind her, followed by voices. At least 2 men, maybe more. She was here. The journal's gone. Check the tunnel. Marcus said the old man was paranoid enough to build multiple exits. Sarah crawled through the narrow passage as quickly as she dared, her jacket catching on rough stone, her knees scraping against the uneven floor. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, but finally opened into what appeared to be a maintenance room in the hotel's basement. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the air smelled of rust and stagnant water. She emerged just as her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number, Warehouse District, 1247 Industrial Boulevard. You have 20 minutes. 20 minutes to save Detective Rivera's life. 20 minutes to figure out how to use the journal's contents as leverage, instead of simply handing over everything her father had died to protect. Sarah thought of the bank account numbers, the documented evidence of years of money laundering and worse. Marcus Kane's entire operation was detailed in those pages. Names, places, enough evidence to bring down what appeared to be a criminal empire spanning multiple continents. But none of that mattered if Rivera died because of her. Sarah checked her watch and ran for the basement stairs. She had 18 minutes to get across town, and somehow she had to figure out a way to save the detective without destroying the only chance of bringing her father's killers to justice. The warehouse district waited in the darkness ahead, and with it, answers that might cost everything. The knock came at 3 in the morning, soft but insistent. Sarah jolted awake from her position at the desk where she'd fallen asleep, surrounded by her father's documents. The hotel room felt different in the darkness, charged with an electric tension that made her skin crawl. She pressed her ear to the door, heart hammering. The hallway beyond was silent. Sarah Marcus's voice barely above a whisper. "It's me." Relief flooded through her as she unlocked the door, but it vanished the moment she saw his face. Blood trickled from a cut above his left eye, and his shirt was torn. "We need to go. Now." He pushed past her, already gathering the scattered papers. "They found us." "Who found us? What happened to you?" "2 men. Professionals. I lost them in the old service tunnels, but they'll be back with reinforcements." His hands moved with practiced efficiency, stuffing documents into her bag. "Did you find anything in these files?" Sarah's mind raced as she threw clothes into a suitcase. "Maybe. There's a pattern in the investments. All the companies are connected to a man named Victor Kozlov. And there's this." She held up a photograph of her father standing next to a tall, silver-haired man outside what looked like a European bank. This was hidden behind another photo. Marcus studied the image in the dim light. "Kozlov. I've heard that name before." A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps, careful and measured, approaching their door. Marcus motioned for silence and moved to the window. "Fire escape. We go down 3 floors, then across to the old building. There's a passage that connects to the subway tunnels." Sarah slung her bag over her shoulder, her father's journal clutched against her chest. The footsteps had stopped directly outside their door. The window opened with a groan that seemed deafeningly loud in the stillness. Marcus went first, testing each rung of the rusted fire escape before trusting it with his weight. Sarah followed, trying not to look down at the alley far below. They had descended 2 floors when the hotel room window above them exploded outward in a shower of glass. Sarah bit back a scream as fragments rained down around them. "Move." Marcus grabbed her hand, pulling her sideways across a narrow gap between buildings. They landed hard on a neighboring fire escape just as a flashlight beam cut through the darkness where they'd been standing. The next few minutes blurred together, a desperate scramble down unfamiliar passages, through a basement that smelled of decay and old secrets, then into a maintenance tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the city. Marcus led the way with the confidence of someone who had mapped these routes long ago, though Sarah wondered why a hotel manager would know such things. They finally emerged through a concealed entrance in an abandoned subway station. Sarah's lungs burned as she collapsed onto a bench, her father's journal still pressed against her chest like a shield. "Who are you?" she gasped, studying Marcus in the faint light filtering down from the street above. "Really?" He was quiet for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. "Your father saved my life once. I owed him a debt." "That's not an answer." "Former CIA. I was burned on an operation in Eastern Europe, left to die by my own people. Your father got me out, gave me a new identity, a clean start." Marcus sat heavily beside her. "When he died, I thought the secrets died with him. I stayed at the hotel to make sure nobody came looking. Then you showed up." Sarah opened her father's journal, running her fingers over the coded entries that had become as familiar as her own handwriting. "These numbers aren't just bank accounts. They're coordinates, dates, transaction records, a complete map of money laundering operations spanning decades. And Kozlov? I think he was my father's handler, or maybe his partner." She flipped to a page near the back of the journal. "Look at this entry from 2 weeks before my father died. K demands full records. Threat assessment critical, insurance policy activated. S must never know unless..." And then it's cut off. Marcus leaned closer. "Insurance policy. He meant you. He left you the hotel because he knew you'd find this journal." A train rumbled somewhere in the tunnels beyond their abandoned platform, its distant thunder making the walls vibrate. Sarah thought about her quiet life just days ago, teaching literature to bored college students, her biggest worry whether to grade papers or watch Netflix. There's more. She turned to the final entry in the journal. He wrote this the day he died, just coordinates and a single word, Genesis. "Genesis," Marcus repeated. "Beginning or creation." Sarah stood, decision crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on glass. "We need to find those coordinates. Whatever Genesis is, whatever my father was protecting, it's bigger than just money. People don't send professional killers for bank accounts." Above them, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "Then we'd better move fast," Marcus said, "because I don't think we're the only ones who figured that out." The basement felt different now that Sarah understood its true purpose. What had once seemed like random architectural quirks, the reinforced walls, the peculiar ventilation system, the maze-like layout, now revealed themselves as carefully engineered security features. Her father hadn't just hidden a fortune, he'd built a fortress around it. Marcus worked methodically through the filing cabinets, while Sarah focused on the safe's contents. Among the documents, she'd found architectural blueprints that showed hidden compartments throughout the hotel, each marked with cryptic symbols that matched her father's journal entries. The web of secrets ran deeper than either of them had imagined. "Sarah, you need to see this." Marcus's voice carried an urgency that made her stomach clench. He held a manila folder, his face pale in the fluorescent light. "These are shipping manifests. Your father wasn't just documenting criminal activity, he was facilitating it." She took the folder with trembling hands. The documents detailed cargo shipments through various ports, all bearing legitimate company letterheads. But the handwritten notes in the margins told a different story: weapons, drugs, human trafficking. The amounts were staggering, the destinations spanning 3 continents. "No," she whispered, scanning the pages. He was gathering evidence. "Look at the dates. These span 15 years. He was building a case. Or building an empire." Marcus pulled out more files. "Sarah, some of these shipments went through companies he owned. He wasn't just watching these crimes happen, he was profiting from them." The words hit her like physical blows. She'd been clinging to the image of her father as a man seeking redemption, someone who'd tried to make amends for past mistakes. But the evidence painted a darker picture. A criminal who'd spent decades orchestrating some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Her phone buzzed. Elena's name flashed on the screen, and Sarah's finger hovered over the answer button. Could she trust anyone now? If her father had been this deeply involved in criminal networks, how many people were still protecting his interests? Don't answer it, Marcus said, reading her hesitation. Not until we know what we're dealing with. The phone fell silent, then immediately started ringing again. This time it was an unknown number. Sarah answered with a curt hello. Miss Chen. The voice was smooth, cultured, with a faint accent she couldn't place. I believe we need to talk. Who is this? Someone who knew your father well, someone who's been very patient while you've explored his legacy. But patience has its limits. Sarah's blood went cold. She gestured frantically to Marcus, who moved closer to listen. What do you want? She managed. The same thing everyone wants, Miss Chen. What's rightfully theirs. Your father made certain promises before his death. Commitments that must be honored. I don't know what you're talking about. A low chuckle. Of course you do. You've been quite busy in that basement of yours. Quite resourceful, just like Richard said you'd be. He was very proud, you know, spoke of you often. The casual mention of her father's name sent ice through her veins. You're lying. Am I? He kept a photograph of you on his desk, the one from your college graduation. He regretted not being there, but his circumstances made family reunions complicated. Sarah's legs felt weak. She'd never told anyone about that graduation photo, the one where she'd looked hopefully into the crowd, searching for a father who'd never shown up. What do you want? She repeated. A meeting. Tonight. There are arrangements to be made, transfers to complete. Your father's network doesn't simply disappear because he did. And if I refuse? The silence stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the connection had dropped. When the man spoke again, his tone had lost all pretense of civility. Miss Chen, your father accumulated many debts in his final years. Financial debts, but also debts of loyalty, of silence, of protection. Those debts have now passed to you. You can honor them voluntarily, or we can find other ways to collect what we're owed. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her hand shaking. Marcus was already moving, gathering documents and shoving them into bags. We're leaving, he said. Right now. Where can we go? If they know about the basement, they know everything. Maybe not everything. He held up a blueprint she hadn't seen before. These tunnels, they connect to the old subway system. Your father built himself an escape route. Sarah looked around the basement that had become both treasure vault and tomb. Everything she'd discovered about her father painted him as a man caught between seeking redemption and perpetuating evil. But perhaps that complexity was exactly what made him dangerous to so many people. The elevator suddenly hummed to life above them. Marcus grabbed her arm. The tunnel entrance, where is it? Sarah frantically studied the blueprint, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed overhead. Her father's greatest secret wasn't the money or the evidence. It was that he'd built Sarah a way out. The fire escape ladder groaned under Sarah's weight as she descended into the alley behind the hotel. Marcus waited below, his face pale in the dim streetlight. Blood still seeped through the makeshift bandage around his arm, but his eyes were alert and determined. They're watching the front entrance, he whispered as she reached the ground. Black sedan, 2 men inside, professional. Sarah's pulse quickened. She clutched the leather portfolio containing her father's decoded documents. The proof of everything. Senator Blackwood's offshore accounts, the names of every corrupt official who'd helped launder money through legitimate businesses, including the hotel. Most damning of all, the location of the $200 million in bearer bonds hidden somewhere within the building's walls. We need to get to Detective Morrison, she said. He's the only one we can trust. Marcus shook his head. Morrison's phone goes straight to voicemail. Something's wrong. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Morrison had been their lifeline, the one honest cop willing to help them expose the conspiracy. If Blackwood's people had gotten to him, glass shattered somewhere above them. Sarah looked up to see a dark figure moving past the third-floor window of her father's old office. "They're inside," Marcus breathed. Sarah's mind raced. The men searching upstairs would find the hidden safe behind the false wall, but it would be empty. She'd been smart enough to remove everything the night before, but they'd also discover her father's final message, the one she'd only just decoded an hour ago. The message that revealed she wasn't just Richard Henley's daughter, she was his designated successor. The hotel wasn't just a hiding place for evidence, it was the central hub of a network that had been secretly documenting corruption for decades. Her father had spent years building an insurance policy against the very people he'd helped, creating a web of evidence so comprehensive that destroying it would be impossible. But only if she could get it to the right people. "There's another way," Sarah said suddenly. "My father had contingency plans. He wouldn't have put everything in Morrison's hands." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the contacts list her father had encrypted in the hotel's reservation system. There, James Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. The timestamp showed her father had updated this contact just 3 days before his death. The call connected after 2 rings. "Chen, Agent Chen, this is Sarah Henley, Richard Henley's daughter. I think my father contacted you about—" "Where are you?" Chen's voice was sharp, urgent. "We've been looking for you for 12 hours. Detective Morrison is dead." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus caught her arm as she swayed. "When?" she managed. "This morning. Made to look like a robbery, but we know better." "How much do you have?" "Everything." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Names, accounts, evidence of murders, 200 million in bonds that prove the money trail." "Jesus." "Location?" More glass broke above them. Sarah heard boots on the fire escape. They'd found her escape route. The Grandview Hotel, but "We're compromised." "They're here now. Federal building, downtown, 20 minutes. Can you make it?" Sarah looked at Marcus, who was already scanning the alley for an exit route. The mouth of the alley opened onto a busy street, but between them and safety were at least 50 yards of open ground. "We'll try." Sarah Chen's voice was deadly serious. "Whatever you do, don't let them take you alive. These people have killed 6 witnesses in the past month alone." The line went dead. Sarah grabbed Marcus's good arm and they ran. Behind them, shouts erupted from the hotel. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness of the alley, and she heard the distinctive sound of footsteps on metal. More men descending the fire escape. They reached the street just as a black SUV rounded the corner, its headlights sweeping toward them. Marcus yanked Sarah behind a parked car as the vehicle slowed. There, he pointed across the street to where a subway entrance glowed with fluorescent light. "If we can reach the train—" "Go," Sarah said. "I'll be right behind you." But as Marcus sprinted across the empty street, Sarah realized she'd made a fatal error. In her pocket, her phone was buzzing with an incoming call. The screen showed a number she didn't recognize, but somehow she knew exactly who it was. She answered, despite herself. "Miss Henley." The voice was cultured, calm. "Senator Blackwood, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Sarah watched Marcus disappear safely down the subway steps. At least one of them would make it. "It never belonged to you," she said quietly. "Your father thought he was so clever, but he made one crucial mistake. He trusted the wrong people. Just as you're about to do." The black SUV's doors opened and 3 men stepped out. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the decoded message glowing on her laptop screen. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her father hadn't been running from his enemies when he died. He'd been preparing to expose them. The hotel room felt smaller now, shadows pressing in from every corner despite the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Marcus sat beside her on the bed, his face grim as he read over her shoulder. "The consortium," he whispered. "Jesus, Sarah. Your father documented everything, names, dates, transaction records. This isn't just about the money. It's about bringing down a network that's been operating for decades. She scrolled through the files, each revelation more damning than the last. Her father's final message wasn't just a treasure map, it was a carefully constructed indictment. Bank officials, government contractors, offshore shell companies, all connected by threads of corruption that led back to a single source. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a series of photographs embedded in the files. "These aren't random hotel guests. They're all here, the same people who've been trying to get their hands on the hotel." Marcus leaned closer. "That's Senator Williams. And isn't that Robert Chen from the development company?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "They were all here. My father was watching them, recording their meetings." A soft knock at the door made them both freeze. Sarah quickly closed the laptop, her heart hammering against her ribs. They weren't expecting anyone, and after everything that had happened, unexpected visitors meant danger. Marcus motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door. "Who is it?" "Housekeeping," came a muffled female voice. "We don't need anything," Marcus called back. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal, someone picking the lock. Sarah grabbed the laptop and her father's journal, stuffing them into her backpack with practiced speed. Marcus was already moving toward the window, testing the latch. They were 3 floors up, but the fire escape was just outside. The lock clicked open. Marcus threw the window wide as the door burst inward. It wasn't housekeeping. 3 men in dark suits flooded into the room, and Sarah recognized the lead figure immediately. Vincent Cray, the man who'd been hunting her since this nightmare began. "Going somewhere, Miss Coleman?" Cray's voice was silk over steel. "I think it's time we had that conversation." Marcus was already through the window, reaching back for Sarah. She grabbed his hand and swung her leg over the sill just as Cray lunged forward. His fingers brushed her shoulder, but she was already falling toward the fire escape platform below. They landed hard, the metal grating clanging under their combined weight. Above them, Cray was shouting orders, his men already moving to cut off their escape routes. Sarah could hear footsteps thundering down the hotel's internal stairwells. "This way," Marcus gasped, pulling her toward the ladder that led to the alley. But as they reached the edge of the platform, Sarah saw more figures emerging from the shadows below. They were surrounded. "The roof," she said, looking up instead of down. "We go up." They climbed frantically, the old fire escape swaying under their weight. Sarah's backpack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but she couldn't let go of it. Everything her father had died to protect was in that bag. Behind them, she could hear Cray and his men following, their pursuit relentless. The sounds of the city, traffic, sirens, ordinary life, seemed impossibly distant now. All that existed was this vertical chase, this desperate scramble toward an uncertain escape. They reached the roof, gasping and disoriented. The hotel's neighboring buildings stretched out before them, a maze of ventilation units and satellite dishes. Marcus was already scanning for options when Sarah spotted something that made her stomach drop. More men were emerging from the roof access door of the adjacent building. Cray's people had anticipated their move. There, Marcus pointed to a narrow gap between buildings. "If we can make that jump?" "That's at least 8 feet, Sarah protested. "You got a better idea?" The roof access door behind them burst open. Cray appeared, no longer the composed businessman. His face was flushed with exertion and fury, his expensive suit rumpled from the climb. "Enough running," he called across the rooftop. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Sarah. Your father's dead. His crusade died with him. Just give me what I need, and you can walk away from this." Sarah felt something crystallize inside her chest, a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. "My father didn't die for nothing," she shouted back, "and I'm not walking away." She grabbed Marcus's hand and ran toward the edge of the building. Behind them, Cray's shouts echoed across the rooftop, but Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about her father's courage, his determination to expose the truth even when he knew it would cost him everything. The gap between buildings yawned before them, 8 feet of empty air and terrible possibility. They jumped. Sarah's hands trembled as she pressed the hidden panel behind the grandfather clock. The mechanism clicked and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow corridor she'd never seen before. The musty air carried the scent of old paper and something metallic that made her stomach turn. "This way leads to the real vault," she whispered to Marcus, who stood guard by the door. The one in the basement was just a decoy. Flashlight beam cut through the darkness as they descended a spiral staircase carved directly into the rock foundation. Each step echoed, despite their attempts at silence. Sarah counted 43 steps before they reached the bottom, where a heavy steel door waited, its surface unmarked by time or rust. Her father's final message had been clear once she'd decoded it using the hotel's architectural blueprints. The numbers weren't coordinates, they were measurements. Distances from the lobby's center point to various rooms, creating a map that led here, to the true heart of his empire. The door's lock required 3 keys. Sarah had found the first 2 hidden in plain sight, one embedded in the hotel's cornerstone, another sewn into the lining of a painting frame. The third had been the most obvious yet hardest to accept, her father's wedding ring, the one piece of jewelry her mother had kept all these years. As the tumblers aligned and the door swung open, Sarah's breath caught. The room beyond wasn't filled with money or gold bars. Instead, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer meticulously labeled with dates spanning 4 decades. In the center sat a simple desk with a computer system that looked decades ahead of anything she'd seen. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed behind her. "It's not a vault, it's a database." Sarah approached the nearest cabinet and pulled open a drawer labeled 1985 to 1987. Inside were hundreds of files, each containing photographs, documents, and audio transcripts. She pulled one at random and felt her blood freeze. Senator Patricia Halverson, the same woman who'd been calling the shots with Detective Morrison. The file contained photos of her accepting briefcases full of cash, transcripts of phone conversations discussing arms deals, and bank records showing payments to offshore accounts. The documentation was exhaustive, damning, and absolutely irrefutable. He was blackmailing them, Sarah realized, her voice hollow. All of them. For 40 years. Marcus moved to another cabinet, scanning the labels. "Look at these names, half the state government, federal judges, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies." He pulled out a thick folder. "Your father wasn't just documenting corruption, he was orchestrating it, then holding it over their heads." The computer system hummed to life as Sarah touched the keyboard. Her father's familiar handwriting covered a note taped to the monitor. "For Sarah, press F7, then your birthday." The screen filled with video files, thousands of them, all time-stamped and cross-referenced with the physical documents. Sarah clicked on one from 3 years ago and watched Senator Halverson discuss the murder of a journalist who'd been investigating defense contracts. "That's why they want me dead," Sarah whispered. "It's not about money, it's about this, all of this evidence." The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. Marcus grabbed her arm, but there was nowhere to run. They were trapped 40 feet underground with only one exit. "Sarah Chen." Detective Morrison's voice carried down the stairs, cold and professional. "I know you're down there. Come up slowly with your hands visible." But it wasn't Morrison who appeared in the doorway first. Senator Halverson descended the stairs with 3 armed men, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking as she took in the scope of the room. 40 goddamn years, she muttered, her eyes scanning the filing cabinets. 40 years of paying that bastard, and he leaves it all to his daughter like some sick inheritance. Sarah found her voice. "How many people did you kill to keep this secret?" "Not nearly enough, apparently." Halverson nodded to one of her men, who raised his weapon. "Your father thought he was clever, building all these safeguards, hiding evidence in multiple locations. But he made one mistake." "What mistake?" "He trusted someone." Halverson's smile was razor-thin. "Did you really think Marcus found you by accident? That he just happened to be investigating your father's death?" Sarah's world tilted. She turned to Marcus, whose expression had shifted from concern to something else entirely. resignation mixed with what might have been genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said quietly. "I really am. But they have my daughter." The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow. Sarah backed toward the desk, her mind racing through every conversation, every moment of trust she'd placed in him. The computer screen still glowed behind her, thousands of files waiting to expose decades of corruption and murder. Halvorson raised her own weapon. "Goodbye, Miss Chen. Your father's empire dies with you." Sarah's hand found the keyboard behind her back. If she was going to die, she'd make sure the truth survived. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Sarah clutched the decoded message, her father's final revelation burning in her mind. The consortium had been using the hotel as more than a money laundering operation. They'd been storing evidence of their crimes in the hidden vault, insurance against each other's betrayal. Now that insurance was in her hands. Marcus paced near the window, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with federal agents. "We need a full tactical team at the hotel in 20 minutes, he said, his voice tight with urgency. "And I want the building surrounded before we go in." Detective Chen emerged from the shadows, her expression grim. "Sarah, we've got a problem. Our surveillance team just went dark. 3 agents were watching Blackwood's known associates, and they've all missed their check-ins." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "He knows we're here." The sound of vehicles outside confirmed her worst fears. Marcus ended his call and drew his weapon, moving to peer through the grimy window. Black SUVs, at least 6 men, all armed. He turned back to them, his face set with determination. "There's a service tunnel that leads to the adjacent building. Chen, get Sarah out of here." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah said, but Marcus was already shaking his head. "Those documents are the only proof we have. If something happens to them, everything your father died for means nothing." He pressed his spare gun into her trembling hands. "Go. Get to the hotel and retrieve whatever else is in that vault before they destroy it all." The sound of splintering wood echoed through the warehouse as the front door gave way. Chen grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward a concealed panel in the far wall. "Move!" They slipped through the narrow passage as gunfire erupted behind them. Sarah's heart hammered as she crawled through the cramped tunnel, her father's documents clutched against her chest. Behind her she could hear shouting and the crash of overturned furniture. The tunnel opened into the basement of an abandoned office building. Chen led her up a rusty fire escape to street level, where her unmarked car waited in an alley. "Get in," she ordered, scanning the area for threats. As they drove through the narrow streets, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us. Room 237. Come alone, or your friend dies." Chen glanced at the screen and cursed under her breath. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "But Marcus is in there, and room 237 is where this all started. My father's room." They approached the hotel from the back, using the service entrance Sarah had discovered weeks ago. The building seemed eerily quiet, its broken windows like dead eyes staring down at them. Chen checked her weapon and radio one more time before they entered. The lobby was empty, but Sarah could sense they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every creak of the old building's bones made her jump. They climbed the stairs slowly, Chen leading with her gun drawn. The second-floor hallway stretched before them like a gauntlet. Room 237's door stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Chen positioned herself beside the frame and nodded to Sarah. "Remember," she whispered, "whatever happens, those documents get to the FBI." Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was exactly as she'd left it weeks ago, except for the man sitting calmly in the chair by the window. James Blackwood looked older than his photographs, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the chaos of the evening. "Miss Chen," he said without turning around, "I've been waiting for you." "Where's Marcus?" Sarah demanded, keeping her distance from the window. Blackwood finally turned, and Sarah saw the cold calculation in his eyes that had terrified her father. Safe for now. Though I'm afraid the same can't be said for Detective Chen's backup units. My associates can be quite thorough. You're finished, Sarah said, pulling out the decoded documents. I have everything. Every crime, every cover-up, every dirty dollar you've hidden in this place. Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Do you really think those papers matter? I've been planning for this contingency since before you were born. Your father was always too sentimental, too trusting. He thought he could protect you by hiding the truth. Instead, he's delivered you right to me. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Sarah's blood run cold. She glanced back to see Chen had vanished, leaving her alone with Blackwood and whatever forces he'd assembled outside the door. Now then, Blackwood said, rising from his chair with predatory grace, let's discuss the terms of your surrender. Those documents in exchange for your life and the life of Agent Torres. Though I'm afraid Detective Chen has already outlived her usefulness. Sarah's hands trembled as she slid the final piece into place on her father's elaborate puzzle box. The mechanism clicked softly, and a hidden compartment revealed itself with a whisper of aged wood. Inside lay a single flash drive and a letter bearing her name in her father's familiar handwriting. The basement vault hummed with nervous energy as Marcus kept watch at the entrance while Detective Chen coordinated with federal agents upstairs. They had maybe 20 minutes before Vincent Harrow's people would regroup and mount another assault on the hotel. Sarah knew this was her last chance to uncover the truth that had cost her father his life. She inserted the drive into her laptop, and the screen filled with financial records spanning 3 decades. Her father hadn't just stumbled upon corruption, he'd been systematically documenting it, building an airtight case against some of the most powerful people in the state. Politicians, judges, business leaders, all connected through a web of bribery, money laundering, and worse. My dearest Sarah, she read aloud from the letter, her voice barely above a whisper. If you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I've failed to protect you as I promised your mother I would. But perhaps my failure can become your strength. Marcus glanced over, his face etched with concern. What else does it say? Sarah's eyes scanned the pages quickly. He knew they were closing in on him. He'd been feeding information to the FBI, but someone in the bureau was compromised. That's why he had to hide everything here, in the hotel. He says Vincent Harrow was just middle management. The real power behind everything is someone called the Architect. The laptop chimed, and a new folder appeared on the screen labeled Insurance Policy. Sarah clicked it open to find video files, dozens of them. The first showed a familiar face, Senator Patricia Kellerman, the woman who denounced her presidential campaign just last month, accepting a briefcase full of cash from a man Sarah recognized as a known arms dealer. Jesus, Marcus breathed. Your father was recording everything. The videos continued, each one more damaging than the last. Judges taking bribes to fix cases, police chiefs covering up murders, city officials selling permits for buildings that would never pass safety inspections. But it was the final video that made Sarah's blood run cold. Vincent Harrow sat across a table from Senator Kellerman herself, discussing the Sarah problem with chilling casualness. Kellerman's voice was crystal clear as she instructed Harrow to eliminate any remaining loose ends and make sure Robert's little secrets stay buried with him. She's the architect, Sarah whispered, the pieces finally falling into place. Senator Kellerman has been running this entire operation. She's been positioning herself for the presidency while orchestrating one of the largest criminal enterprises in the country. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell above, and Chen's voice called down urgently. We've got movement on all sides. Black SUVs, at least a dozen vehicles. They're surrounding the building. Sarah's mind raced. The evidence on the drive was enough to bring down Kellerman and her entire network, but only if they could get it to the right people. With federal agents potentially compromised and Harrow's forces closing in, their options were rapidly shrinking. "There's a service tunnel," she said suddenly, remembering something from her father's architectural notes. "It connects to the subway system 2 blocks away. Dad used it during Prohibition to move liquor without detection." Marcus was already moving toward the vault's rear wall, running his hands along the stone surface until he found the hidden lever her father had described in his notes. The wall swung inward with a grinding sound, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. Sarah grabbed the laptop and shoved the drive into her jacket pocket along with her father's letter. Behind them, the sound of gunfire erupted from the upper floors. Chen's voice shouted commands, but the words were lost in the chaos of what sounded like a full-scale assault. "Go!" Marcus pushed her toward the tunnel entrance. "I'll seal it behind us and buy you some time. We go together or not at all," Sarah said firmly, pulling him into the passage with her. They ran through the narrow tunnel, emergency lighting from their phones casting eerie shadows on the brick walls. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer as Harrow's men discovered their escape route. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, and Sarah's lungs burned with each desperate breath. Finally, they reached a rusted ladder that led up to a subway maintenance access. Marcus climbed first, forcing open the heavy grate above them. Cool night air rushed down as they emerged into an abandoned section of the subway system. Sarah clutched the evidence that would expose one of the biggest conspiracies in American history. But as sirens wailed in the distance and the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel behind them, she realized their fight for survival had only just begun. The vault door stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Sarah pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the hidden chamber, Marcus's flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead of them. Every shadow could hide another of Blackwood's men. Every echo could signal their approach. "The ledgers are in the back corner," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of their breathing. "Your father kept them in a steel case behind the false wall." Sarah nodded, though her hands shook as she followed him deeper into the vault. The walls were lined with safety deposit boxes, hundreds of them, each one containing secrets that had cost lives to protect. Her father's life, nearly hers. The steel case was exactly where Marcus had said it would be. As Sarah's fingers worked the combination her father had hidden in the hotel's architectural plans, a sequence of numbers she'd memorized from the pattern of window placements on the 3rd floor, she could hear distant footsteps echoing from somewhere in the hotel above. "They've found the entrance," Marcus said, checking his watch. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they figure out how to get down here." The case clicked open. Inside were 3 leather-bound ledgers, their pages filled with her father's meticulous handwriting. Names, dates, amounts, locations, a complete record of 20 years of money laundering, corruption, and murder. Senator Blackwood's name appeared on nearly every page, but he wasn't alone. Judges, police commissioners, federal prosecutors, even a Supreme Court justice, all of them caught in the web her father had been forced to maintain. "Jesus," Sarah breathed, photographing each page with her phone. "This goes all the way to the top." "Your father was careful," Marcus said, keeping watch at the vault entrance. "He knew this day would come. That's why he built all the safeguards into the hotel, why he made it so only you could find this place." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Detective Rodriguez. "FBI is on scene. Keep your head down until we secure the building." But even as relief flooded through her, Sarah knew it wasn't over. The ledgers proved everything, but the people named in them had resources that went far beyond what any single FBI operation could contain. Her father had spent 20 years learning that lesson the hard way. "There's something else," Marcus said, reaching past her into the case. "He left this for you specifically." It was a sealed envelope with her name written in her father's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. "Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then you found the truth I spent 20 years trying to escape. These ledgers are my confession, but they're also your inheritance, not the money, which was never mine to give, but the knowledge to finally end this. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National, box 1847. Inside you'll find evidence of something bigger than even these ledgers reveal, the real reason they could never let me walk away. Trust Rodriguez. Trust Marcus. And remember that sometimes the only way to win is to burn everything down and start over. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved, but maybe I can still give you the justice we both need. The footsteps above were getting louder now, accompanied by voices and what sounded like equipment being moved. Sarah pocketed the key and the letter, then grabbed the ledgers. "We need another way out," she said. Marcus smiled grimly. "Your father thought of that too. There's a tunnel that connects to the old subway maintenance system. It comes out 6 blocks away." As they made their way to the back of the vault, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to me. Walk away now, or join your father." Sarah showed the message to Marcus, who cursed under his breath. "Blackwood. Even with the FBI here, he's not backing down." "Good," Sarah said, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "I'm tired of running from shadows." The tunnel was narrow and damp, clearly unused for decades. As they crawled through it, Sarah could hear muffled explosions from behind them. Whether it was the FBI breaching the vault, or Blackwood's people destroying evidence, she couldn't tell. 20 minutes later, they emerged through a grate in an abandoned subway station. Rodriguez was waiting for them with a full tactical team, and Sarah had never been so happy to see anyone in her life. "Please tell me you got what we need," Rodriguez said. Sarah held up the ledgers and her phone. Everything. Names, numbers, dates, enough to bring down half the city's power structure. But as they climbed toward street level, Sarah's hand closed around the brass key in her pocket. Whatever her father had hidden in that safety deposit box, whatever final secret he'd saved for last, she knew this was only the beginning. The hotel had given up its secrets, but the real fight was just starting.